Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the community panel session on mastering psychological flexibility. I'm your host, Fabian Cheong, and joining me today is TEDx speaker, cross-cultural coach Brian Lee, as well as our own Naluri executive coach, life coach, Lidia Plotkina.
Hello, everyone.
How are you guys doing today? How are you guys feeling?
Good, good. Very excited to have this discussion today.
Yes, honestly, I'm also a little bit nervous, but definitely excited to kind of start off this. And looks like we have people coming all the way from Indonesia as well. I see Noch, shout out to you from Indonesia. Yes, feeling amazing. Everyone is feeling good. Hopefully, everyone had like their breakfast as well. And yeah, let's get started. Well, actually, before we get started a little bit, maybe you guys can introduce yourself a little bit. What do you do? Who are you? What type of clients do you normally kind of see? And what type of issues do you normally deal with on a day-to-day basis? Maybe we'll start with Brian a little bit.
Okay, good morning. My name is Brian. I'm based here in Seoul, South Korea. So it's quite cold where I am right now. And you might hear from my accent, I actually was born and raised in the USA. But then later I lived in Korea, Japan. I spent 9 years of my career working in China. And then I transitioned to becoming a cross-cultural executive coach. So just like Lydia, I'm ICF certified with the International Coaching Federation. And I primarily help companies like some of my clients are Microsoft and Nike. Help companies work more effectively across cultures. So I'm sure you might be aware in your experience as well that working with people from different backgrounds can lead to different misunderstandings or different ways of working. And so to help them navigate those transitions, we promote ideas like psychological flexibility. So that's why we are here to discuss that important topic today. And if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can find me there. Maybe we can send the link into the chat later. And let me pass the microphone over to my friend Lydia.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lidia. I'm currently based in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, but I'm originally from Russia, from Moscow. I've been in Malaysia for quite a while. Actually, funny enough, I'm a lawyer by my first degree, but I'm not a lawyer anymore. What I practice now is life and career coaching. I'm an executive coach with Naluri, and I'm also certified, as Brian said, with International Coaching Federation. What I do in my career coaching, I mostly work with corporate executives on their personal and professional development. It could be motivation and morale, relationship, managing your boss, complex workplace situation, public speaking, stress, anxiety at the workplace, work-life harmony, and many, many things that relates to the career. So this is my true passion, and I love doing this. I'm also currently pursuing my PhD in human resource management, and hopefully that's going to be my final year when I submit my thesis. I'm going to be done with that. Yes, and again, very excited to be here today.
Wonderful. And I think just from the sound of it, there is so much for us to kind of learn from you guys, because you have both worked with so many different people, both at the manager and at the, I guess, entry level as well, from different cultures and different types of people as well. Lydia in particular, and I definitely like gone through your website. You have your own personal website for anyone who is interested. She shares a lot of like testimonials on like all the lives that she has changed as well. And for Brian, helping you plug a little bit as well. Like if you go onto YouTube and search for him, you can definitely find his TEDx talk. I've listened to it like quite a few times as well. It's a really, really inspiring one. Yeah, but before we get started, let me go through a couple of the housekeeping rules. So primarily, let's go through a little bit of housekeeping rules before we get too excited over here, right? Let's make sure that all of you are using some of the supported browsers over here. Chrome, Firefox, Safari, as well as Edge is highly recommended. If you are seeing any issues, I believe someone on chat mentioned that they are experiencing, like they cannot really hear some of the speakers. Try to refresh your browser or check your speaker settings to see if it's working okay. I think someone from our team has also sent in a guide on how you can do that as well, right? Let's make sure that your internet connection is stable so you can also be able to hear the whole entirety of this session. Right? You don't want to miss out on any of these like knowledge nuggets that we're going to be sharing with you today. And if you do continue to experience any issues, please do private message Naluri events, and they'll be more than happy to help you out from there. Throughout the session, there will also be polls and questions that we'll be prompting you guys with. So we want to keep this a little bit more interactive. We want to keep this a little bit more engaging as well, right? So we don't want to make this like a lecture per se. So if you do have any questions or any experiences that you want to share, drop them into the chat there, and we will be more than happy to address them. And we'll try our best to address all of them if there is a lot. Yeah, without further ado, let's go through a little bit of the agenda. All right. The three main points that we're going to be going through today is number one, what is psychological flexibility? Why psychological flexibility even matters? And how do we actually build this skill to help you thrive in both your workplace as well as your personal lives as well? All right. And if you stick to the very, very end, we will be sharing with you a couple of practical tips for you to actually get started and practical tips for you to build this habit of psychological flexibility. All right. We'll also be sharing a little bit of teasers on what's going to happen next month. So please do stay tuned. And yeah, I think with that, let us get started. All right. So to get things started, maybe we'll start off with a quick poll. So let me flash that up very quick to better help us understand what is everyone's understanding of what psychological flexibility is, right? It's a little bit of like a jargon word. It's like big fancy words almost. But let's see what everyone kind of thinks as well, right? So the polls are filling up. We have about 20 or so answers, almost 30 now. It looks like most people are quite unfamiliar with it to slightly familiar with it as well.
Yep. Mostly slightly, no, unfamiliar actually is the majority, I think. Yeah. Is it? Or we're having different polls?
Yeah, mostly unfamiliar. They're mostly unfamiliar. Almost like 50% of the audience so far is quite unfamiliar with this term of psychological flexibility, right? It is a bit of like a fancy word, but definitely let's explain a little bit more or dive deeper into like what this actually means. Maybe Lidia, you can start us off, right? Like, how would you kind of define psychological flexibility?
Sure. Thank you, Fabian. That's actually a very good thing to understand psychological flexibility, because it kind of brings us to the place, it's like our in control of ourselves or our brain, or I don't know, something else in our body, our emotions are in control of ourselves. Like, can we manage certain situations with our conscious efforts or not? So psychological flexibility is, I can identify it as a state and also as a tool. State is when you have a space to react to external triggers, for example, right? We face so many triggers in our current world, and it's our choice how we react to them, right? So we can get frustrated over some things, or we can get flexible over some things, right? It's that space that we create between our own reaction and the external stimulus. So this is a state of mind where we are aware of our emotions and then we choose our reactions. We have a choice. And at the same time, it can be a tool where we use psychological flexibility to manage certain situations with a certain actions that are available within psychological flexibility. So it kind of detaching ourselves from what we're experiencing and being able to take a pause and take a step back to see what is happening in front of us. And seeing that space is to understand how can we react in this potential situation. It means that we can have choices. Just because something is triggering us from the external world, like our boss is scolding us and criticizing us and triggering us, we can immediately get upset and very emotional over this thing. But we can take a step back, and instead of reacting, we can pause and think, do I agree or not with these words, right? With this feedback? Is it true or not? Why I am so angry, right? What exactly specific out of his words made me frustrated, right? So it's creating the space in between ourselves and the triggers, and also using psychological flexibility as a tool to manage certain situations. It's like, sometimes when I think about psychological flexibility, I think about yoga. I've been practicing yoga in the past. So in yoga, they teach you to be very flexible in your own body, right? Because we have our habitual ways of doing things, of addressing things, right? We don't usually bend, we don't usually twist this way, and then we lean somewhere to reach the pen, then suddenly our lower back is stuck and we can't get back to the
I can definitely
floor.
attest to that. Yes.
So they kind of put you in the discomfort for you to be able to stay comfortable or get more comfortable with the discomfort. So you twist to the left, you twist to the right, you get into the triangle shape, and you feel very uncomfortable. Everything is stretching, but you need to breathe in to get through this discomfort. That's how when life throws us a curveball, instead of us just rushing into everything, doing something without thinking, how do we take a pause? How do we observe, evaluate, and then react, or not even react, respond rationally and mindfully in different situations? So in a nutshell, this is my understanding of psychological flexibility.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful way to kind of put it, right? I think there's a very common saying: you cannot really control the things that are going to happen to you, but you can control how you respond to it, right?
Yes.
And I think, exactly like you said, maybe it sounds a lot easier than it is as well, right? It just says, oh, if something happens, let me take a second to breathe or stop and pause and think about the situation before I respond to it. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is. And I think there is a lot of practice and a lot of mindfulness as well to be able to actually be able to do this. But Brian, like off camera, I think as we were kind of preparing for this session as well, we definitely brought up you brought up this process for psychological flexibility. Maybe we can get into that a little bit as well.
That's right. Thanks, Fabian. So we can take a look at this slide. What Lidia just shared, I think, is a brilliant description of the ideal state we're aiming towards. So if you think about the goal of coaching or therapy or any type of leadership development, the goal is to become somebody who's flexible and resilient, somebody with a growth mindset, somebody who's able to adapt to any of the stresses or challenges that life throws at you. And as Fabian, as you're mentioning, it's much harder to do that in practice, especially when you're not equipped with the right tools. So I really love the terminology that Lidia is using about toolkits, because this framework is technically called a type of therapy. So when we think about what ACT stands for, it's acceptance and commitment therapy. But this is a tool that not only can help people who are struggling with their emotions or their situations, but it's also applied in executive coaching to help leaders become even more effective. So whether you're trying to go from that sort of challenge state to a normal state, or to go from your current performance to the next level, this is the type of framework that you can use as a process. It's a step-by-step process. There's 6 steps. And I'll try to give a little bit of definition and example for each one of these steps. So we'll start with acceptance. And like Lidia mentioned, we need to make space for whatever emotion we're experiencing or the situation we're facing. So in other words, acceptance is making space for discomfort. And I think in a workplace setting, this can mean understanding the challenges in front of me instead of avoiding the difficulty of the situation or the difficult conversations that need to happen because of the situation, right? So let's say, for example, you're going into a performance review with your boss. It's perfectly normal to feel nervous. It's perfectly normal to say, I'm noticing that I'm stressed and I can still get my work done. I can still walk into this meeting. And if anything, that acknowledgement allows us to do the proper preparation. Because I think oftentimes when we look at what we call maladaptive behaviors, or behaviors that don't really serve us, when we experience a negative emotion, when we experience stress, there is a temptation to avoid or to distract or to procrastinate because, of course, our short-term desire is to avoid this stress. And what acceptance allows us to do is to say, I can feel this stress and also I'm able to do something about it. So acceptance is really acknowledging that this is a uncomfortable situation for myself. And it's not even about liking or disliking comfort. It's simply about you have the agency or you have the power, the freedom to move forward despite whatever's happening to you. So that's acceptance. And please let me know if you have any questions on these, because we are taking a look at the chat along the way. So if you have any questions about any one of these, please just let us know and we're happy to address it.
Yeah, no, I think definitely received the whole acceptance means making space for discomfort, right?
That's right. Exactly. And so once you're able to do that, the next step is cognitive diffusion. And I've already touched on this a little bit, but it's specifically knowing that our emotions and our thoughts are not who we are. So another example of this would be, let's say, Fabian's a little bit nervous about the webinar today. That doesn't mean that he's not capable, right? That emotion is actually asking Fabian to prepare. And, I know he spent many hours preparing a script and rehearsing and doing a technical checks. And that's why today's session is going smoothly, is because he knew that he wanted to prepare for it. I think somebody without psychological flexibility would tend to think, I'm nervous because I'm not good at presenting. I'm nervous because I think I'm going to fail. And that belief might come from a reasonable place. It might be informing us that, okay, I'm not prepared, right? But that's different from saying that I myself am not good at that. I'm not good at public speaking. I'm not good at presenting. So what we tend to encourage people to do is to visualize or write down your thoughts. And once you write down all of these thoughts or concerns or doubts, we then diffuse from them, which just means that we do not associate ourselves with that thought. We just we are able to see them as things that will pass, because we all know that these emotions are important, but they don't define who we are, and they don't define whether or not we are successful, right? So there are people who are successful public speakers and are not nervous. There are people who are successful and they're nervous, and there's also people who are not nervous and unsuccessful, right? So we just know that these two things are sometimes correlated, but really what our job is to do is to prepare. It's not to dwell in the anxiety or to believe the anxiety as the only truth. So that's what cognitive diffusion means. If we say that diffusion is helping us gain some distance from our emotions and thoughts, we also can be very present. So that's the third step, which means that whatever's happening in this moment, we can be here and now with this. So in this example, if you're giving a presentation, instead of worrying about all the other things that might happen before or after, am I prepared? How's the audience going to, think about me? Am I doing a good job? All of these questions are good questions, but probably not helpful in the moment, right? Imagine if you're trying to perform the piano for an audience and somebody's whispering in your ear, what if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? Right? Or if somebody's bugging you while you're trying to focus, it would be incredibly distracting. And so being present is a muscle. Mindfulness is a muscle. We're trying to cultivate this practice of being fully immersed in whatever you're doing. So if you're playing piano, play the piano. If you're speaking, speak. You don't need to worry about all of the consequences in that specific moment, because we know that we're going to do a debrief later, right? Or we can analyze our performance later. So in the workplace setting, if you're in a meeting, instead of trying to multitask, instead of trying to take notes and being glued to your computer, try to look up, try to see people, try to really listen actively and deeply and engage fully with them. And when it comes to some more abstract work, so let's say that you're trying to respond to a stressful email. You don't need to respond right away. You can also take a pause, and like Fabian mentioned, you can take a breath. You can ground in the present moment, remembering that this email is something that you can handle. And just having permission to take time, to slow down, to breathe, will help us be less reactive, right? Because oftentimes the mistakes we make are not because we don't know what the right action is, but it's because we've reacted too quickly to the emotion. If somebody's yelling at us or someone's upset at us, it's very easy to react and simply reflect that energy and yell back. But if we can take a moment and say, can we take a 5-minute break? That's usually enough to diffuse the entire situation. So that's another version of being present. Step 4 is self as context, which means that you are more than your thoughts and feelings. So having the cognitive diffusion, which is distance from your emotion, being present, which means being present in the current moment. 4th is knowing that you are bigger than all of this, right? So even if your client is unhappy, even if a project doesn't go well, it doesn't mean that you failed. You are somebody who has experienced many setbacks, and you're a person who is still learning. And when you think about who you will be in the next year, you're probably going to look back at the setback and be proud of how you've overcome it. Right? So the problem is not that you don't know how to do it today. The problem is if you don't learn how to do it in the future. And so that part of that growth mindset is remembering that the way we measure success is not in today's small tasks. It's actually in the course of your entire lifetime. Are you becoming a stronger, more confident person? And I think this is part of the benefit of a coach, is that if you work with a coach or a therapist long term, this is somebody who's going to remember that you are a whole person that's growing over many, many years. You're not being evaluated just in this project. And of course, if you're working at a company, your manager probably will review your performance, on a monthly or quarterly basis. That's part of, a job. But remember that any single performance doesn't necessarily need to define your entire future. And
I think
even if you are, you have a setback in the short term, that might be a blessing in disguise. Sometimes when I, let's say, made a certain client upset, that client decided to leave the company, stop working with us. But that was a blessing in disguise, because actually that client was just not aligned with what our company was trying to do. So taking a long-term view is also sometimes very helpful when managing emotions.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I think I wanted to add to that a little bit, right? I think something that someone told me just about a year ago, and it still sticks to me today, is that whenever you're trying something new, it's unreasonable to think that you will immediately succeed in it. So you're going to make mistakes. This is the first time you're trying out a new project or trying out to do something completely new, and you don't know how to do it, right? So it's very natural to make mistakes. You kind of have to give yourself a little bit of grace in order to make mistakes, in order to actually grow from it.
That's right. Exactly, Fabian. And I think part of the problem here is that in a professional setting, we're often seeing people as their most polished, or almost like their highlight reel. We see that with social media, that people are presenting their story as if it was very smooth, right? Like, I did this and this, and then I achieved my goal. When in reality, things are very messy and people make mistakes. And that can be, whether or not society normalizes that, I think in our own individual lives, we know that, if we have a child or we have a best friend who's making mistakes, we still encourage them and we still remind them that this doesn't define them. And I think it's really important to do that for ourselves as well, as professionals in our personal lives, that giving ourselves permission to fail, because we know that failure leads to learning. That is another type of cognitive diffusion, to remember that this single event doesn't define me. And that actually connects very well with values. So what enables you to actually have space from emotions is remembering that there are other things that are more important to you. So your values are the things that guide you. For example, if growth is one of your values, then every one of your setbacks is actually a learning opportunity, because it helps you grow, right? So having a value around, for example, perfection, that's something that we might help our clients realize, that they were expecting perfection. Like you said, Fabian, people sometimes expect themselves to be perfect from day one, right? I show up to a new job and I'm already performing in the top 1%, and I'm going to make tons of money and everybody's going to love me. I think that type of expectation is not really rooted in reality, which is that if you're new to the job, you're probably not going to know most things. right? And respect actually takes quite a lot of time to earn. And so having a third party, whether it's a coach or somebody else in your life, a mentor perhaps, who's able to remind you that, to say, this is a long, one of my values is growing for the long term, or one of my values is growing together with others. Those are the types of values that can really help you navigate uncertainty and make tough decisions. Whereas if some of your values are around perfection, I think it's okay to have a standard, which is to say, let's aim for perfection. Let's try to do the best job possible. But that's separate from saying, I also value the value of failure, or the value of making mistakes, and we want to have a culture where that's encouraged. And then finally, number 6 is important, and I think this is especially where coaching is valuable, is that coaches will hold you accountable to commitment. So that is your action towards your goals. How will you move towards your goals? So for example, let's say you're aware that you don't like networking. Let's say you're more introverted, you have social anxiety, or you feel embarrassed to put yourself out on social media. That's totally fine, right? That's a very normal experience. But what is one small step you can take that is still within your abilities? And so a coach might suggest, okay, how about sending one LinkedIn message? Or how about attending one casual event that you're interested in? Or, it can be the smallest step possible that still helps you make progress towards your goal. And if leadership is your goal, for example, you could practice speaking up in meetings. You could practice scheduling a coffee chat with somebody that you would like to get to know better. So committed action here, we're really focusing on progress, on incremental progress, more than we are on perfection, right? So we don't want to set those types of KPIs or OKRs that to say, okay, I need to have 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, right? I think that makes sense in the context of a business goal, but in the context of a psychological goal, what you want to do is actually tie your, desired result to a very realistic positive action, which is, let me add one new LinkedIn connection, or let me reach out to one new person. And then those small wins aggregate and accumulate over time. So those are the 6 steps of psychological flexibility, and specifically this acceptance commitment framework. So how do you move from acceptance all the way through to commitment? And again, it's difficult to do all 6 steps, and it really helps to work here. So I'm not saying that this is an easy or a quick approach, but what's nice is that people have developed these tools, and what we can do is try to diagnose for ourselves which of these 6 might feel like a weak point for us, or something that we're not quite aware of. And then we can work with ourselves, or we can work with a coach to help us brainstorm what can we do to become stronger in these areas.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. I think that is a beautiful way of describing this whole entire framework as well. I think everyone on chat, I think there's quite a lot of people from Hani, Amelia, Jasmine, Daisy as well, Yang and Fatma. They are all asking more or less the same questions, which is, how do we kind of practice or build this muscle that you mentioned as well, right? I think something that came across my mind is that many people tend to skip the first, I guess, 5 steps of this and jump straight into just doing the action, which, exactly like you said, results in usually the more undesirable outcome. That's where you start making mistakes. That's where you start doing things that you may or may not regret in the future as well, right? So exactly what I believe there was a really good question over here, that Jasmine brought up. Logically, we understand that the past doesn't define us, but how do we get over the emotional part, and how that we can't directly heal from right away? How do we actually practice detaching ourselves from these emotions and actually looking at it at a more logical or practical way?
Yes, detaching from emotions. So thank you, Jasmine, for that question. I think the question that I would ask if I were your coach, I would first try to understand what makes this emotion so important to you. Like, when we think about your attachment, it probably is because you're using that emotion in a way that's helpful to you. So example might be, let's say your colleague does something that really makes you angry. You're just upset. You're venting about it to your coach, let's say. And what my job would be as a coach would to say, first of all, let's acknowledge and accept that emotion, which is to say, of course, you're feeling angry because of what this person did. I think cognitive diffusion in this case might be, can we consider this is your perspective? What might be the other person's perspective on it? Do we understand what the other person is experiencing? Right? And that's a bit of a challenging question, and it might feel like um, you're not in the mood to try to understand this other person you're upset at. But going through that exercise with a third party can actually help us calm down quite a bit, because it helps us remind us ourselves that this person is not necessarily trying to harm us, or not necessarily an evil person, but probably has their own motivations. And the more we can understand that, the more skilled we become in navigating the situation. Because the moment that we make it an argument between two people and there's only one winner, then that means there must be a loser. When in reality, I think flexibility allows us to see that two people can have different goals, but they can also work on the same team. And you can approach this with more of a solution-oriented lens versus a personal lens, which is to say, I take things personally and this person is the problem. I think once we get to that level of emotion, it becomes very difficult to identify the solution that works for both parties. But if we're solution-oriented, we can say, here are my needs and my feelings. Here are this other person's feelings. How do we balance them? And, I think, Jasmine, the detachment and not wanting to suppress your emotion is correct. We don't want to suppress anger, because anger tells us that something has gone wrong. Something has, one of our boundaries has been crossed. Therefore, we need to really respect that signal, right? It obviously is coming from somewhere. At the same time, we need to also recognize that acting or reacting from our anger probably will lead to mistakes, right? Whenever you see somebody who's angry on the street, you know that that person's not safe to engage with, because we don't actually know what they might do. So having time to process the anger and to say, okay, I am angry, and also I don't want to act from that place. I want to take some time to think about how I want to respond strategically. I think that's where coaching or journaling allows us to take that time. Did I answer, Jasmine, your question? I hope so. Let me know if I haven't, but we'll mark this as finished answered for now, and would love to hear from other people's questions.
Yeah. I think, and we'll get into a lot more of this as well, like how do we have practical steps to actually improve our psychological flexibility, right? But before we get into that a little bit, maybe I do want to hear from more people on chat. Sorry, I do want to hear more from the people in chat. Like, when was the last time you felt that you needed more psychological flexibility? Was there a scenario that you can think of, like exactly like what Brian has given a few examples of, right? Maybe your boss is scolding you, maybe in your house, your spouse or your partners is coming home a little bit angry, and you are coming home a little bit angry as well, and there's a lot of tension between that, for example. Yeah, love to hear from the people on chat. Exactly. At the workplace, you need to meet a lot of different personalities. I definitely agree with that as well. As we kind of work with different people from different, not just ages, but different roles as well. People come in with different ways of working, right? And the way that you would interact with them would be very, very different. And that requires a lot of psychological flexibility. I think a really good question that someone brought up as well and related to this is on the topic of like guilt tripping a little bit. How do we apply diffusion and detaching ourselves when there is so much, I guess, rumination happening between internally within the person as well? Any thoughts on this, Ryan?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, welcome Lydia to jump into, because I'm sure she's handled this situation many times. In my experience, guilt is, again, a useful emotion when it signals to us that something has gone wrong and we could have done things differently, right? And in many ways, it's a positive emotion because, for example, if I hurt Fabian's feelings for some reason, if I disrespected him, I didn't realize it, and then I realized I did that, I have that new awareness, I would feel guilty. And I think that's very healthy and helps me grow as a person, right? And then I would apologize and make it up to Fabian, right? I think when we are guilt tripping somebody else, that can feel very uncomfortable, right? To say to Fabian, hey, Fabian, I think you did this wrong. I think you disrespected me, and therefore you should change. You should feel guilty. I think that's quite a difficult way to try to get somebody to manipulate somebody else to act differently. And, of course, for Yang specifically, I would love to understand better the specific situation. But when you're mentioning that somebody is beating themselves up because they did something wrong, how do we accept and move on? I think the question is, what is the motivation of the guilt? And is there perhaps a different way to achieve the same result? So let's say, for example, one religious standard might be to not drink alcohol. And if somebody made a mistake and did something that they didn't want to do, the goal is to become more consistent in the future, right? So it's either that you want to forgive yourself and just say, well, people make mistakes and it doesn't define you, and or you could also say, this is something I never want to do again, and I'm going to learn from this experience. It was such a negative experience for me that I will commit to not doing this again. But it's really the action, in my opinion, as a coach, I would really focus on the action, which is to say, can you build the habit that helps you feel proud of yourself? And to be perfectly honest, I think guilt can be a useful emotion. I think oftentimes it's a very harsh emotion. Like guilt and shame are very harsh ways of getting to that result. Whereas we can also choose a more gentler way. For example, you want to be healthy, you want to promote good judgment, good safety, and therefore that's why I want to drink less. I think that would be a much gentler way of achieving the same result. And again, allow someone to feel proud and confident of themselves. So I think one of the metrics I would track, or the question I would ask my client, is what actions help you feel better about yourself, right? Like we should just follow that as your value and as your compass. And it's not my place to tell you what you should or should not do, but we know ourselves what makes us feel better or feel worse about ourselves. And that's normal, right? Everybody has to navigate that. Again, nobody's born perfect. Nobody is absolutely moral. We all are capable of mistakes or doing bad things or hurtful things. So again, removing the sense of we're judging ourselves based on every one of these behaviors. Instead, we're trying to remember that we're trying our best and we're trying to take positive action. And that's all we can ever really do, is try our best. So does that answer your question, Yang? I'm not quite sure, because I would love to have longer, in-depth conversations about all these questions. They're so fascinating. But hopefully this is just a starting point that we can continue discussing.
Yeah. A lot of people are messaging on chat as well, but I think a theme that's popping up a lot on chat is, yes, it's actually quite difficult for us to create that pause, right? Something has happened to you. You understand that you need to pause and detach yourself from the situation and kind of reflect on your action, reflect on your emotions before you act. But a lot of times it's like a flight or fight response, right? It's a survival mechanism. We immediately want to respond and react to a situation.
That's right.
I guess immediately what would be a practical step in that sense, right? Is it just thinking of it after the fact, like reflecting on it later, and then keep reflecting on it until you build that habit or build that action? Does that actually work, or is that also part of like ruminating in that way, that you're
Great
always
question,
thinking about?
Yeah, actually, can I connect that to Amelia's question here? Because I think this is a great example. So Amelia asked about stage fright, right? And so what is the difference between preparing for your presentation because you want to do a good job public speaking versus rumination and overthinking, thinking too much, and just making the anxiety worse, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a balance there. And again, the question that we track is, does that behavior make you feel more or less confident? So the point about stage fright is that it makes perfect sense why we're scared. We're being judged by hundreds of people, right? And same thing for today. I could say for this webinar, 171 people right in this room, they might hate me. They might think that I'm a imposter. They might be very upset with what I share today. All of those thoughts are possibilities. And the more I think about that possibility, the more it makes me feel less confident. Whereas I could also think about other possibilities. I could think about, what if somebody hears this message and finds inspiration, and they're actually very grateful for this time and space that we're providing this webinar free of charge, to the public. And maybe this is just the start of a conversation, and we're not expecting to solve psychological flexibility for the audience, but this is really just helping people move from unfamiliar to somewhat familiar, and then they can choose what to do next. Same thing so bringing this back to stage fright, I think it totally makes sense to do some preparation for a talk. I think it also makes sense to think about after the talk, what could I've done better? But then the moment we start to do too much is when we start to say, oh, I embarrassed myself. I'm so terrible at this. I never want to do that again. I'm just a bad public speaker. Those are the types of thoughts that I think are too extreme for what actually happened, right? We actually want to find balance and have a very calm, fair judgment of what happened. And sometimes we are not our best friends, right? We sometimes say things to ourselves we would never say to somebody else, right? I don't think anybody in the audience would come up to me and say, you know what, Brian, I really think that was a terrible speech. But I might say that to myself. I might say, oh my gosh, that was awful, right? And you could claim that that's just being honest, or that's the true authentic emotion I'm feeling. But I think a friend or a coach or a therapist would say to you, that seems quite harsh, right? Is it also possible that actually you did quite well, even though you were feeling nervous? And even though there's a part of you that's quite harsh on yourself, there's also a part of you that can accept and celebrate that everything's fine, everything's going well. So it's just giving each of those voices the right proportion or the right percentage of your brain space so that the anxiety is true or helpful, but probably only deserves, I don't know, 5 or 10% of your thinking. Whereas you can give other space to other emotions.
Yeah, and it sounds like there is a very fine line between reflecting and ruminating, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you could
So,
reflect
and
on
that's
how
something
you're.
that only right? I think
Exactly.
it's quite hard for an external party to know, wait, is Fabian actually nervous? Or is he just saying that as a way to let everybody feel comfortable, right? Or maybe it's a little bit of both. And I can't actually answer that question for you. Only you know that internally, right? If you're being honest with yourself, you can say, ooh, like I'm probably overthinking this. Or you might be saying, oh, I'm really excited for this webinar. So that's, I think, the benefit of talking this out with a partner is that they can help you achieve more clarity around that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have brought up this very same, like, I guess, realm of topics. Like, how do you prevent yourself from falling to jumping off the edge into rumination and kind of just staying at the reflection level, right?
That's right.
Someone I think mentioned, if I could find it again, yeah, how can someone navigate through not being stuck in doing the perfect thing, and how do you even realize you're trying to create perfection and giving yourself grace in that matter?
Right.
Yeah,
That's a great question, Abhinav. I think there are many techniques for this. One technique I'll share today is being able to take at least 2 or 3 different perspectives. So for example, let's say we're again going back to the case of giving a presentation. And if you expect yourself for it to go perfectly and everybody loves it, but you're actually not sure if you're not quite aware yet of that, I think it helps to think about different perspectives of the stakeholders or the audience of that talk. So for example, you could say, okay, if I were my manager, how would I evaluate this presentation? What would be the expectation for this presentation? and see if you can write down, 3 concrete things, right? So not perfection, not that everything goes great. That's very vague. To be very specific, which is to say, I would assume that my boss wants to hear a report or an update on the progress of this project, right? And let's compare that to a aforementioned goal that we had already aligned on during the last meeting. Let's compare those, the goal and the result. And maybe they also want to hear the next result or the next goal. So that exercise, it's a thought exercise, which is just saying, what do I think my boss cares about? What do I think this audience member wants to hear? And if I deliver the presentation the way I expect, what would be the outcome? And the more we can do that type of thought experiment, that's when we're practicing flexibility, right? Is learning how to adapt, how to see things from different angles.
Yeah, like I think, and sorry, just to very quickly sidebar and address this as well. Lydia had to drop off because she wasn't feeling too well. But I just wanted to bring back something that Lydia brought up about psychological flexibility. Very similar to like yoga, you have to like bend yourself in a way that and see angles of perspectives that you've never seen before, quite literally.
That's some extreme yoga.
That's some extreme yoga.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly what you mentioned as well. If someone is, if you're speaking to someone, kind of see things from their point of view. What do they value? What do they actually want out of this conversation? Past all the emotions, past all the feelings that are being like thrown in front of you as well.
That's right. And I think to give credit to Abhinav, the fact that you're asking this question already tells me that you have awareness that you might be stuck in this perfect loop. So I think asking the question is exactly right. And you're probably aware if you have that extreme thinking of, I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted everything to go well. You'll experience that suffering that comes, or the disappointment that comes from that. And then again, that's not a bad feeling. It simply helps us realize that, oh, I was expecting perfection. And maybe that was the wrong expectation.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned earlier in the ACT framework as well, the first step of this whole entire thing is being able to accept and be aware of the fact that you have these emotions and these are the things that you're going through.
That's right. And again, this is not an easy thing, right? We actually are probably very unaware of all the things that are happening. So again, that's why I think having a coach or having some external resource can really benefit us in raising our awareness, right? And it's often, when I think about the leaders that I coach, there's a common misunderstanding that this is all about knowledge. So I think when you're early in your career, the way you get good at your job is by getting more knowledge, learning, reading books. But once you become a manager or a leader, there's not that many books you can read. You can read leadership books, right? And they say, okay, lead by example, or, support your team and, really make space for your team to grow. But those are not concrete pieces of advice.
Yeah.
Actually, they don't teach you about yourself. I think the best leaders are the ones that realize that at some point it's not about knowledge. It's about self-awareness.
Yes.
It's about the ability to recognize this is an area I can grow in and I need to practice this muscle. And that's when those soft skills really come into play, right? So how do I know I'm good at building relationships or managing stakeholders? There's no book that can tell me that. There's no test that can tell me that. I need to reflect, and having a coach is a little bit like hiring a personal trainer. Like we could all be stronger and healthier. Having a trainer can really get us to the next level more than we could just on our own, right? And there are people who can watch YouTube videos and get super fit by themselves. I'm sure those people exist. I'm also sure that 90% of people actually would make more progress if they hired somebody to help them, somebody who has the knowledge and can motivate them and can raise their awareness.
Yeah. And I think immediately as well, right? I mean, coming from you as the coach as well, so we've talked about how this is definitely not an easy thing to do, right? It is something that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of practice as well, right? But then what is that one thing that people should do more of in order to build this muscle? It's something that it sounds like we have to keep going at it, right?
That's right. That's right. So I think this is related to some of the other comments that I'm seeing in the chat, which is that, yes, what if some people, you have self-awareness, the other person doesn't, or people are trying to guilt or shame you, and you want to overcome that, right? So part of the reason this is difficult is because we might be talking to ourselves in a way that's very rigid or harsh. Other people certainly will talk to us in ways that are rigid or harsh or misunderstand who we are. And those are constant stressors, constant anxiety, constant pressure. And the one thing that I would advocate for is that you want space from both yourself as well as other people. So a good example of this has happened to me earlier this month or last month. We have Lunar New Year in Korea, right? And there's a classic trope or theme that you go to visit your family. Everybody asks you, when are you going to get married? How much money are you making? Why don't you buy a house? Etc. Right? All of those questions are so classic, and we dread those questions, right? But what's interesting to me is that a couple years ago, if I heard that question, I would be so upset. I would say, can you please stop bringing this up? I really don't want to think about this, right? And now I'm a bit older, right? And I'm a bit wiser, and I can say, to my, we call them in Korean it would be komo, and Chinese it would be ai, or whatever that auntie or uncle is saying to you. You can say, hey, auntie, uncle, I'm actually focused on my career right now, and I'm dating, and I don't want to rush getting married. And if I can say that with lots of self-belief, so confidence and calmness, and I'm not triggered, my auntie and uncle can think or believe whatever they want. It doesn't change my decision-making process. I don't have to, I love them, but I don't have to listen to them, right? Like I will never take advice from somebody who doesn't have a life that I want. And I don't want the life of my auntie and uncle, right? I want the life that I am living. I like my life. Therefore, I can gently just say, oh, that's not for me. Thank you for your advice. I appreciate your advice. I know you just want to help me, but it's okay. It's okay for me to live my life too. And what's fascinating to me is that the better I get at that regulation, the self-regulation, the more chill my aunties and uncles are, right? Because part of their anxiety is that they're worried for me. But if they see that I'm confident and calm and self-assured, then they also can feel that too. So I always think that every relationship is co-created, right? Both parties have some role. And if you really don't like the other person, you can smile and say thank you, but no thank you. And that kind of calm confidence is a really protective barrier, and also doesn't require you to get angry, right? So again, that's kind of a new tool that I have now, right? And I've developed that through reading, through journaling, through coaching, through therapy for myself, right? I have those are my tools, and if I keep working at it, it gets easier and easier. And now I don't mind showing up for these New Year holidays, because it doesn't matter what other people think, right? I already know who I am. I already know how I'm going to respond to these kind of questions. And, even if I just say, please, let's talk about something else. Nobody can force me to talk about anything, right? And, if in a more extreme case, let's say I'm being yelled at by my boss or my client, I can say, I really appreciate your feedback. It's hard for me to understand you when you're yelling. Can we take a 5-minute break? And I just leave the room. Right? And of course it's risky, because maybe that client might even blow up more, or they might scream harder. But I also hope for all of us in this room that we also have the freedom to walk away from people like that. Like, we don't really need to have to stay in that room if we're really being mistreated. So that's my hope. And what you said earlier, I know, Fabian, that you talk to people who have experienced verbal abuse or other types of negative experiences. And I think that's quite common, especially in Asia, right? So giving people permission to take space, to walk away, to kindly say no thank you. We need more people to give examples of that and model that in order for our culture to change. So I think that's also part of the reason why I like this framework of ACT, because it gives us a very structured approach to how we can handle these situations. And again, learning from a coach or a mentor, somebody who's already been through this, can be a really great shortcut to knowing what that looks like and what that sounds like.
Yeah, I think to wrap up a little bit onto like what you were just saying as well. I think we all deserve that little bit of grace and a little bit of like we deserve to have that value, I guess. Like we can't just let other people kind of cross our boundaries. We have to kind of set boundaries between things as well. If people are crossing that boundary, how do we kind of respond to that in a very calm and collected manner? And I think
That's
it
right.
can only happen. Oh no, I froze. Let me reconnect. Ooh, hello, I'm back, I think. Terribly sorry for that. Am I back online?
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes. It looks like, oh, Brian is coming back. Yep,
Hello,
looks like
testing.
everyone's right.
Okay,
Yep, Brian, I can hear you as well.
great. Sorry about that. I did want to quickly address the comment from Serafina that
Hmm.
perhaps to keep calm or to leave a room might seem rude, right?
Mm.
And what I would love if I could just add one last takeaway from today's conversation is that we cannot control how other people react to us, right? We can only
100%.
control how we react. And Serafina, if I were your coach, I would question this framing, which is, oh, maybe I should not be rude to my client. I would argue that the person who is raging at you is the one who's being rude.
Exactly.
And if they cannot control their behavior, well, then we need
Mm.
to control our behavior, right? If you're saying,
Yes.
oh, if you are raging, it is fully within my right to care for myself, to just ask for a break. Could we say, hey, it seems like the emotions are really strong in this room. Is it okay for me to take a quick bathroom break? I
Mm.
think that would really help us collect my thoughts. I just need to take a moment. And, whatever reason you want to give, it doesn't matter. I think at the end of the day, protecting yourself is the kindest thing you can do for yourself. It's probably also better for the other person. If I can take a break, that other person probably benefits too. So I would actually say that that's the most polite thing possible, which is to not tolerate this type of rude behavior from the other person. I hope Serafina, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think she received it quite well. It is a very like sort of an Asian mindset. And the worst thing, one of the worst things you can do is like you kind of sit there and just kind of take the abuse and take the beating. But like you said, the best thing to do is maybe to just very calmly and intentionally be very polite and say, hey, look, there is quite a lot of tension in the room. Or is it okay if we take like a 2-minute break, a bathroom break to kind of reset the environment a little bit? Um, Very mindful of time, but just kind of ending today a little bit. If there was one thing, I guess, before we get into support and resources that we want to share with people who are watching and listening, if there is like one thing that people should do more of onto their day-to-day routines to help build psychological flexibility, what do you think that should be?
I think having some um, process for taking time, right? We've already
Mm,
talked so many times about taking space, leaving room for emotions, but what that really means is taking time out of your schedule. So whether that's even just 10 minutes before a big meeting, or 10
mm,
minutes after a big meeting, or 10 minutes at the beginning or end of your day, it really just takes a little bit of time to do a quick check-in with yourself, right? Just as much as it's
mm,
important to check in with others, right? When I have a call with Fabian, I say, hey, Fabian, how are you? Right? That's a real question. I want to do a check-in with you. You can do that check-in with yourself to say, how am I doing? How am I feeling
mm,
right now? And what do I want to do about that feeling? Right?
mm,
And just even that is very valuable self-coaching and reflection. So some people do that in a journal. Some people will, kind of meditate. Um, I also think it's really fun to do it with a coach, to have somebody else ask you that question, right? To say, Fabian, you have a whole hour to talk this out with me, and we can get really detailed about some difficult things and help you navigate that, help you brainstorm, help you feel more confident. I think that's really invaluable, and I meet with my coach and therapist, once every week. I meet with my mentor once a month. I think that those things have transformed the way I am able to handle stress. So, yeah, I hope also people feel like they're not alone in this, that everybody struggles and that's okay. But to get help can be really transformative.
Yeah, like asking the questions, what am I feeling? Why do I feel this way? And if I am not comfortable, like I think Saleha was saying right before she left, that I am not comfortable with this, and kind of validating that, right? And it's like asking yourself, what is it that's not making you comfortable? I think there's also a point, and a lot of people have been talking about just like feeling bad about feeling bad almost. But it's also kind of asking yourself, like, is this questions, or are these thoughts helpful, rather? Are these thoughts helpful to make me become more psychologically flexible, just a better person, a better employee, and all that? Yeah, very mindful of time. I'm so sorry we couldn't get through every question, because there was quite a lot. But just jumping into some of the resources and some of the things that we are doing next month before we close off. So I think, as all of you may know, there is a well-being challenge happening, a health challenge that is happening the whole of this month. There is about one more week or so left of this challenge. And this is a very great challenge and very related to this topic, because a part of the challenge is also talking about journaling, talk about mood journaling, talking about how do we practice this habit of reflecting on emotions, reflecting on the day itself as well. Next month, I understand that for a lot of people, it's like tax season as well. So a little bit of a teaser what's happening next month is that there is going to be a Mastering Personal Finances for Beginners. This will be talking about a lot of understanding your cash flow, understanding your finances, and getting started with that. If you are interested in this, reach out to your HR teams to get yourself registered. And lastly, a couple of plugs about the Naluri services itself is that if you are interested to do coaching, we do have a whole team of coaches, from mental health coaches and psychologists and counselors to executive coaches and life coaches like Lidia that you saw just now as well, to help you go through. And all of them are great people to talk about mastering psychological flexibility, right? And they will help guide you through all these questions and all these journaling tips to become more psychologically flexible. And lastly, I think all of you on call should have access to this already, the Naluri app and Naluri web, where you are able to chat with these coaches one-on-one on a day-to-day basis, like asking them to ask you those questions or updating them about how do you feel on a day-to-day basis. Right. I don't believe we have any more time for Q&A. I'm terribly apologize for that, but hopefully throughout this whole entire session, we've answered enough questions as well. And yeah, last thing before everyone leaves, do drop us a quick feedback on some of the things that we can improve on, some things you like or maybe disliked. And I think with that, that kind of wraps up today's session. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning in. Thank you, Brian, for joining us as well in this conversation.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone. See you all. Take care. Bye-bye.